Hi HR Nation, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we're lucky enough to be joined once again by our good friend Whitney Johnson. I think it's been 3, maybe 4 years. I feel I've lost track of time at this point. She's the CEO of Disruption Advisors. She's also named by Thinkers 50 as one of the top 10 business thinkers in the world. She's an award-winning author, LinkedIn influencer. There's not much she hasn't done at this point, to be honest. But today, she's going to be sharing some insights from her new book, Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. Welcome back. How are you?
Chris, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
And for those that are watching, there's the book behind you, right on display. I love it. Is that what's it on? It's like a plinth. Like,
oh, yeah. You know what? That's a great word, a plinth. So that was my decorator gave that to me to put plants on. But right now, the most important thing that we're growing is this book. So right
it's
now,
called Smart Growth.
Is on the plinth. Yes,
it is called Smart Growth, so it makes sense. It looks really cool. It actually looks like it was made for that purpose.
Because, and we'll just pretend like it was.
Yeah, I love it. Well, firstly, we were talking beforehand. It's been 3 years, probably maybe more. How are you? How's the family? How are things? Let's just start there.
You know, it's funny that you're asking me that question because I just had the pleasure and privilege of being on the Wellbeing Summit with you and with Chester. Well, not with you, but your team and Chester. And you're asking that question of how are you? And it's always a really are you really asking me how I am?
No, I really am. Yeah.
You really are asking me how I am. And so the answer is, I'm doing really well.
Nice.
Thank you for asking.
That's good to hear. It's interesting that you mentioned that point, because in the past, asking someone, how are you? It was just like, oh, you're only asking that because it's part of your manager training to say, how are you? As opposed to how are you really? Yeah. Or maybe I've heard some interesting versions of saying, how are you now? So people realize, oh, it actually cares. Or he or she actually really does care as well. But so look, let's jump in. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us at the Wellbeing Summit. At Ripple had amazing feedback, so thanks for that. It was always a pleasure. Fun. Obviously, a bit of an irony that I was at home unwell during the Wellbeing Summit, so I needed to practice a lot of what we were preaching during the summit and making sure I don't burn myself out and get sick as well. So it's probably a bit of an irony there as well. But thank you for passing by and obviously sharing your insights. But this new book, Smart Growth, what was the inspiration behind this sort of latest book?
I had written 2 prior books to this, actually 3 prior books, but in this series, a book called Disrupt Yourself and a book called Build an A-Team. And in both of those books, I had something called the S-curve of learning. In both instances, it was pretty much in the background. It was something like a background singer or a supporting actor. But what would happen is I would go speak or consult or coach or do a podcast like this, and people would say, let's talk about the S-curve. And I remember in particular, Dan Pink having me on his Pink cast and saying, let's talk about that. Of all the different things we could have talked about, he wanted to talk about that. And so I started to realize this is something that's very useful. It's very valuable. I need to do more work on it. It needs to not just be a backup singer, but in fact, the lead singer. And so that is what this book is really looking at how can you use this S-curve of learning to map what growth looks like? Because when you understand where you are in your growth, you increase your capacity to grow. And that's what this book does. Mm-hmm.
And for those that haven't read that, explain a little bit more about what the S-curve of learning is. Just so they,
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Happy to do that. So the S-curve is something that was originally popularized by Everett Rogers, a sociologist, 50, 60 years ago. And he was using it to figure out how groups change over time. He was originally looking at corn and how people were very slow to adopt a new type of corn that was drought resistant, that had a 20% higher yield, that was easier to harvest, and yet it took a very long time for people to harvest or for people to adopt the corn. And so he started to analyze the data and found that people adopt new ideas in the shape of an S. And so with the corn, for example, it took them 5 years for the first 10% of the farmers to adopt this new type of corn, which was useful. But once 10% adopted it, there hit this knee where over the next 3 years, the penetration went from 10% to 40%. So the steep part of an S. And so we use this S curve that Rogers had adopted that looked at how groups changed. We used it at our Disruptive Innovation Fund that I co-founded with Clayton Christensen, the late Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School. And we used it to help us figure out how quickly will an innovation, in this instance, it wasn't corn, but a telecom innovation, for example, will get adopted. And as we were using that to look at how groups change, as we were using it to look at how innovations are adopted, I had this insight, this aha, that we could use it to help us understand how individuals change. And so whenever you start something new, a new project, a new podcast, a new role, a new HR role, a new person in your company, you are basically at the launch point of that S. Mm-hmm. And what the S curve math tells us is that initially growth will be happening, but it will appear to be slow. And so this is the launch point. But then you're going to put in the effort and you're going to accelerate over that knee of the curve into the steep, sleek back of the S. This is the sweet spot where it's hard, but not too hard. And then after a time, you've put in a lot of effort and a lot of energy, you're going to go into mastery, or the top part of that curve. And this is that place where you figured everything out, but because you're no longer enjoying the feel-good effects of learning, you can get bored. And so you now have this very simple visual model that says slow at the launch point, fast in the sweet spot, slow in mastery. That is how you grow. And when you understand that, you can start to map where you are as well as what's next. Yeah,
that was such a good explanation, by the way. I know you've done it a million times, but that was so great. And I need to just clip that. Ivan, if you're listening, just clip that as a description as well. And that really helped everyone, because we talk about it a lot, but for many people, they're like, what do you mean by this S curve as well? And it's so relatable once you map it out the way you did. And I don't even know where to start, because I want to ask you so many questions, but one of the things that you said in the conversation before we jumped on as well, is 2022 will be the year of tremendous growth in the workplace. Why is that? Why do you say that?
Why do I posit that?
Yeah.
Psychologists have found that periods of severe stress, like a pandemic, often lead to tremendous growth, and they call it post-traumatic growth. We talk a lot about post-traumatic stress, but this is post-traumatic growth. And so coming out of the pandemic, we are in this place, we're primed to grow. We've been through this period of tremendous stress. Our capacities have been stretched, they've been tested, and we've discovered that we're more capable than we thought we were. We have flexed some muscles that we didn't know that we had. And so we're now in this place of, I am ready to grow. And in fact, I would argue, a lot of people are talking about the Great Resignation. I don't think it's that. The Great Resignation implies that people are giving up. And I think that's not what's happening. People are not giving up. They're not saying resigning from. I think they're actually aspiring to. They're saying, I have discovered that I can do more. I have discovered that life can be different. I have discovered that life can be better. I'm aspiring to more. And so this period coming out of the pandemic where people are growing, this year of the great aspiration, I think there is a huge, huge opportunity. And for any HR leader that understands that, you can use this S curve of learning as a retention, as a recruiting tool to say, if you want to grow, come to my company, come to my organization. I will help you grow.
Yeah. And I love that flip, right? Because you're right, was being seen as a negative. And when I saw you write that the Great Resignation ought to be called the Great Aspiration, I completely agree. And many of the people that I know close to me that are super successful, high performers, aren't leaving because they're because they can't do the job. They're leaving because they're like, you know what, I want more. And I realize now I deserve more. And I can follow that dream. And we were kind of at we had a lot of time to think during lockdown and reflect and be like, is this really what I want to be doing for the rest of my life? Is this aligned with my why and my purpose? And that's the reason, right? Not because people are giving up. So I love the fact that you put it that way. And the amount of friends and family members, including myself, that picked up new hobbies, picked up new passions. It's kind of ignited something, hasn't it, in everyone?
No, what did you pick up? I'm curious, Chris. What new hobby did you pick up?
Oh, well, first and foremost, I'm a hobby addict. So if I'm not doing something new, then do you know what I've picked up though? And you're going to be surprised, is investing in myself more than trying to do everything. So for example, I've just got a coach, Chester Elton, our good friend.
Chester's your coach?
Chester's my coach.
Well done.
Yeah, I've got, so I'm very lucky and grateful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just got a personal trainer. As well, because I realized I need someone to help me be accountable there. So all of the things that I was trying to juggle, I was like, actually, I need help. So admitting I needed help and bringing in, I've actually got an assistant now, which I didn't have before. I know, very, very lucky for everyone listening, by the way. But I realized I was just needed to invest. So even I would say hobbies, I've been more kind of investing in myself. Right. If that makes sense.
What you're saying is, I mean, but I think this is an important observation, is that this forced slowdown gave you time to reflect. It gave you time to zoom out and say, okay, what is working in my life?
Yes.
What is working in my business? What do I want to do to change my business? And to my point, this is a period of tremendous growth because you had that time to stretch and to reflect. And so now you're poised to probably grow in a way that you would not have otherwise grown without
100%.
that 2 years.
Exactly. I realized, again, one of the revelations is the reason I'm always getting burnt out, getting sick, etc. I'm trying to do too much. I need help. And the first step was admitting that I need help to be able as well. So that's the hard part of being able to do that as well. But like, I just seen people around me, like my wife just, she's in the gym now every other day, which is like, whoa, you didn't go gym once before, now you're in the gym every other day as well. And people around me just kind of realize that we're a lot more resilient than we thought we was.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I want to jump into is, and I'm really excited to ask you this question because it's something I've been, it's hard to explain to people over the years, and you've kind of put it perfectly in the book, is, we'll start from the beginning though. Why firstly is it so hard to start something new? Let's just start there and we'll work our way through.
All right. So let me walk you through it. And then I would love for you to reflect. We can do a mini coaching conversation. So here's what's happening in your brain from a neuroscience perspective. Whenever you start something new, your brain has this predictive model that it's running, and it's asking itself the question, I'm at the bottom of the mountain. What do I need to do to get to the top of the mountain? So it has this hypothesis about what it needs to do. Well, at the launch point of the curve, at the base camp of that curve, it has this hypothesis, but as it makes predictions, many of those predictions are inaccurate. And because they're inaccurate, your dopamine drops. So the dopamine, the chemical messenger of delight, that reward mechanism, is just dropping because all your predictions are incorrect. So that's the first thing that's happening. The second thing is, because you're on new terrain, you're on a new S curve, you're in this new place, your brain is working very hard to make memories, to map out what it sees. And so cognitively, it's very, very taxing. So if you're exhausted, well, yes, you should be exhausted because you're in new territory. And then the third thing that's happening, there's more, but these are some of the big things, is that you're having this huge identity shift because you were at the top of another S curve and you were the person, the status quo version of Chris, and you may have liked it. You may not have liked it. Sounds like there were some parts that you didn't like, but it was still really comfortable. And so now you're at the launch point of a curve, and who are you now if you're not who you were? And so your identity is like, oh, I don't quite know. I like the Chris that I'm going to be, but I don't quite recognize him. So this is uncomfortable for me as well. So you've got this cognitively taxing place. You've got dopamine that's dropping. You've got identity questions. So it feels like a slog. You can feel disappointed. You can feel discouraged. You can feel overwhelmed. You can feel incredibly impatient because you've got this open loop that has your anxiety go through the roof, lots of cortisol. And so it's very hard to be in that place of the launch point. And that is why it's hard to start something new.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so what part of the S do people typically give up? Is there...
Oh, at the launch point.
Literally, they didn't even get to the first curve.
Yeah, they give up at the launch point. Now here's some things to know. sometimes you should give up. Not every S curve is going to make sense for you to do. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is at the launch point, there's two different phases. There's the explorer phase and there's the collector phase. So the explorer phase is, okay, here I am on this S curve. I may have chosen it. Maybe the S curve chose me, like when you lose your job. Now I've got to explore. I've got to decide, do I want to be here? Is this aligned with my purpose? Is this aligned with my identity? Is this hard but not too hard? And you're making all of these, you're asking all these questions, you're answering those questions. And if the answers are yes, then you're going to stay a little bit longer. If the answer is no, well, you're going to get off this island and go to a new S curve. One of the things that you want to be able to do is make those determinations. Yes, I've explored. I want to be here. Now you've got to collect. And collect means I'm going to continue to decide, do I want to be here? But also, is the ecosystem hospitable to me? Like, can I do what I want to do? So for example, a person takes a new job and they think, this is the job that I want. But they get into the situation and there's no training. They've got a boss who doesn't want them to grow and develop. And so it might feel like it's the right S curve, but if the ecosystem will not help them be successful, then it's not going to be the right S curve. And in that instance, you want to give up. But to your question, one of the ways that you persist is if you can ask all those questions of like, yeah, this actually is the place that I want to be. I understand that I'm tired. I understand that I need to rest. I understand that I might be a little bit burned out, but that just means I need to rest. So I'm going to stay here. I'm going to pause and I'm going to regain my energy. And then I'm going to persist along this curve because this is where I want to be. And oh, by the way, there's a quick hack that you can use, which is if you get dopamine when you have upside surprises, a hack at the launch point is this. You set small, ridiculously small goals that you can meet. So for example, I am going to study Korean. This goes to one of my passions for COVID for a minute every day because I want to learn Korean. Now, if I said I'm going to learn Korean and study 30 minutes a day, no way is that going to happen because I've got millions of other things I want to do. But a minute a day, I can do a minute a day. So right now I'm at 100-day streak on studying Korean for a minute a day. It's probably a little bit more than that. But every time I have that small goal and I beat it, then I get dopamine. And so then once I get that dopamine at the launch point, that starts to give me energy and momentum to move into the sweet spot of the S curve.
Love that. Because the opposite of that would be like, all right, I'm going to train for a marathon. Let me go out and try and run a marathon.
Exactly.
You're going to give up pretty quickly.
Exactly.
And never do it over again. And also the reason I asked that is because some of my friends, they speak about, we have these conversations, they speak about giving up and they describe some of those feelings. And I say, that's normal. They're like, what do you mean? Right. I'm like, it should feel uncomfortable. It should feel tiring and taxing. And that's how I feel sometimes when I'm building this business and doing the work. And I realized from a young age, growing up playing very highly competitive sports, to be comfortable in discomfort. And in fact, recognize that was where I was growing. And that's where the biggest successes come from. And it became a muscle now. So kind of when I get into that feeling of learning something new, I get excited about it. Even though I feel, even though sometimes it feels horrible and uncomfortable, I know deep down, because I've been there so many times before, this is when the magic happens. And
I love how you said that. I love how you said that. Like, that's right. And it's true, Chris. I find the same thing, that this has helped me so much when I'm doing new things because I can talk myself through it.
Exactly.
And say, okay, I'm feeling this way right now. And like you just said, oh, this is a really good sign that I feel this way because I'm doing something.
It's weird though, right? To explain to someone. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, trust me. And again, I think I was very lucky it was from sports that I realized that grind, that, I can go one more round or, that one more minute or whatever it may be. And you push yourself. And when you come out on the other end, you're like, yes.
I did it. Okay, now I have to ask, what sport? Just you open the loop.
So this is, and I'll ask you a question after, which I one of the reasons I would. So where do I even start? Ice hockey, basketball, skateboarding, table tennis, break dancing. Literally, everything. And this is one of the things I wanted to ask you. One of the things that all of my friends, family, even colleagues are like, Chris, you're great at everything. Why do you never stick to something? So what I would do, I would find myself getting to a very high level of mastery in one of those sports. Because I do think if I would have stuck with one of those sports, I would have probably been a professional athlete in one of those sports. But I got, when I find when I get really good at something, I'm bored. So for me, it's the grind, like the again, it doesn't feel good, but the grind and seeing yourself progress and getting better and falling over on your face and literally and getting up and, you know, spending 1,000 attempts to land that one skateboarding trick. And then when you finally land it, when I finally land it, almost like the satisfaction is there for a few minutes and then it's gone again. Yeah. And that's what I'm trying to do. And a lot of people don't get that. I'm like, so that's why I've done so many sports to a very high level. And Shane, who you've met, obviously, he's the same. So we both used to compete, get really, really, really good. You know, for example, he got to brown belt, close to black belt in karate, and then he just got bored because he was like, all right, I'm pretty much reached the pinnacle. What's next? It's like the next one, right? It's in the process that I love, is basically what I'm trying to say. The journey of being really bad. I love finding things that I'm terrible at, and then knowing that I have this process. It isn't written down, but it's kind of like what you're discussing. There's a series of steps that I've got to go through, and a lot of times it is setting the smaller goals. And then when I get there, I'm like, great, now what? So I love to hear the science behind that. That's what so a question for you is, I would love to understand the science behind what's going on in my brain. Why wouldn't I carry on sticking with something that I'm amazing at? What's going on in there?
It's such a great question. Okay, so basically what you're telling me is you're a dopamine junkie. So here's what's going on. Is at the launch point, right, the dopamine's dropping, but you're like, I know that if I will stick with that, I'm going to get this upside of getting into the sweet spot. And at the sweet spot, every time I have a goal and I beat it, I'm getting this upside surprise. So lots and lots of dopamine. It is thrilling, it's exhilarating. And then once you get to the mastery place, what's happening is that your brain is like, figured it out. I'm really good at this. And you're getting a little bit, but not very much. So your brain is bored. Nothing's new. And so that goads you to do something new. And so what you're saying is that unlike many of us, much of the time, that place, you cannot abide this plateau. It just is, it's almost painful for you. It is painful.
That's a good way of putting it. And even Shane's always like, that's one of the reasons why, as part of my role as a co-founder, is I'm always coming up with new ideas. Because I'm constantly like, let's build this over here. Let's build this. Let's build this new out. Let's build this new summit, Ripple, right? Let's do this thing. And then once I enjoy the challenge of it being really hard, and everyone's saying, you can't do that, it's impossible. And I'm like, really? I get so much satisfaction out of building it. Or, you know, people saying that, you know, there's no way you're going to build the biggest HR podcast in the world. I was like, really? Okay. And it's quite sad in a way, but that's what drives me, is there's this, not to prove it against everyone else, to prove it to me, to outcompete me. And do
which
that.
is exactly, you want to outcompete. Yeah. So again, launch point, it's dropping. Sweet spot, you're getting upside surprise, and mastery, you're not getting very much. And so your brain is just saying, I need more dopamine, go find me a new challenge. And so then you jump to a new curve.
So the other frustration is obviously when I'm trying to explain that to friends who say, I can't do that. And I'm like, have you tried? They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, how long have you tried? And I'm going through this process with them, and I get more frustrated for them. It's not even my problem. And I'm like, but you just got to stick with it. I know, but it's really hard, and I've done it for 2 days. I'm like, 2 days.
What's funny about what you just said, Chris, is that one of the things that I often say is, how do you know what your superpowers are? And one of the ways you know is what exasperates you. And so what you just said is you just flagged one of your superpowers, which is you intuitively understand, you have mastered this growth cycle of being able to start something new, get good at it, and then start something over again. And moving through that growth cycle, navigating that cycle allows you to become a peak performer. It's something that's very comfortable for you. But what you're also realizing is that there are many people for whom it is not comfortable. It's not intuitive. That's why this S curve of learning can be so useful, is because it then gives people that aren't intuitively doing it to have a map. And now you can explain it to all your friends as well. Yeah,
I've never had the process. So I'm trying to I'm like, why don't you get it as well? Because I see so much talent and some incredible people around me that I feel like I'm like, it's gonna suck. it doesn't feel good when you fall over on the ice.
And that's the other thing, Chris, I would say that's really interesting is that as a child, that muscle of doing things that are uncomfortable gets pretty well developed because we don't have control over our environment. But the older you get, the more you have the ability to never do anything new. And so that muscle of doing new things can get very flaccid.
That's even harder.
Yeah, it gets even harder. So we have to practice doing new things to get good at doing new things.
Interesting. Yeah, so it is a muscle. Does the resilience play a role in this? Because I think one of the things that I talk about with the team sometimes is, for example, Shane and I came up from not much, on a council estate, no money, single parent, tough, let's just say tough upbringing, put it that way. So when people say, oh, that's really tough, we're like, really? Like, what if you had no food to eat or no electricity or you had to deal with domestic violence and things like that? So whenever I look at the pain of those growth pains that we're talking about, I always used to look back at that and we're like, well, it's not that hard, is it? So I think that may be part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, again, this goes back to the muscle piece. It was really interesting for me. I remember early on with my podcast, I was noticing that I was really over-indexing on immigrants. And I was like, why am I over-indexing on immigrants? I'm like, oh, now I know why, because they are used to completely starting over with nothing. And so they know how to disrupt themselves. They have that muscle developed. And what you're telling me, one of the tools that you put in your backpack when you're climbing the curve is the ability to embrace constraints. And constraints can break people, but they can make people. And so by using those constraints basically as a barbell to develop your resilience, you're like, okay, I have this hard thing to do, but I've been doing hard things since I was in my mother's womb. I can figure this out. Again, it's a superpower. If people haven't had to develop that muscle, then it's going to be harder for them. And that's part of what I think you and I are trying to do today is give people the tools so they can develop the muscle, so they can go out and do the hard things, which will allow us to live those happy and productive lives that we all want to live.
Yeah. And that was honestly why I was so excited when I learned about the book is I was like, I'm so excited to get this in people's hands. And there's so many people that are out there that are struggling, that don't have that, and having the framework, the structure, the tools, the stories that you tell in the book. On that point, what's one of the stories in the book that really stands out?
I love?
Yeah, there's so many, but
well, I think one story that I love, it's toward the beginning of the book, and I think it goes a bit to the conversation that we're having, is a fellow by the name of Marcus Whitney. And he had gone to the University of Virginia, which is a good school here in the United States, but decided he liked weed and rap more. And so he ended up dropping out. And now he's 23, 24 years old. He's got 2 children. He's working as a waiter, living in an efficiency hotel, which is basically week to week. And life is not very good for him. And he thinks to himself, I have to do something different. And remembers that when he was about 10 years old, his uncle Otis, which is the best name ever, gave him a computer because he worked at IBM. And he had learned a little bit of programming, but hadn't done anything since. So now he's 23, 24, and he says, you know what? I think this is my way out. I'm going to learn to become a programmer. And so he works 12 hours a day waiting tables. He goes home at night, practices programming for 4 or 5 hours, and says, I'm going to figure this out. And, but it took him like 300 job applications to finally get a job because he had never been a programmer. He was waiting tables. He happened to be an African-American male, so he wasn't sort of typecast as someone who was a programmer. But he did eventually get someone to, his wife was about to have a baby, and his wife needed a midwife, and the midwife needed a website. And so he got his first barter arrangement. But here's what he said that I think is so important. And this is the very first decision and question you have to ask yourself when you're on a launch point of a curve, is you ask yourself, do I believe that I can move up the curve? But the more important question is, do I believe that I can move up this curve? And so one of the things he said is he didn't say to himself, I'm becoming a programmer. That wasn't enough. He said, I had to say, I am a programmer.
big
I
difference.
already believe I am a programmer. And he said that one little word shift, he said, I didn't say I was a good programmer. I just said I am. And when he started to believe that, then he was priming his brain and his subconscious was shifting so that he could collect the data and do what he needed to do to become a programmer. And so that is so powerful to me. So if you've got people who are listening and saying, well, that's too hard, I don't know if I can do X, Y, or Z. Well, you may not be able to, but if you can believe that you could and say, I am a programmer, I am a skateboarder, I am a black belt in karate, then it can start to be true. And that is the first question that we need to ask is, do you believe that you can do this?
I love that. And I'm actually quite extreme with this, by the way. I actually have an I am 5-6 hour playlist that I play in my headphones when I just go to sleep, because your subconscious mind stays awake, right? While you're asleep, which is why you kind of wake up in the night sometimes and you're like, what's going on? So I literally just play I am successful. I am all sorts of, I could even send it to anyone who's listening on YouTube. There's multiple versions of, you can find it.
I want to hear it. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
And
I love that.
It's not my voice. It's other, there's like tons of them on YouTube you can get for free around different topics. So I have all different ones and I just play it on a loop and just go to sleep.
But it's not your voice. It's not your voice.
No, it's someone else. I should do it and then have it loop.
You should do it yourself.
I should do that.
It yourself, Chris. Yeah.
It'd be more powerful. But even then, when I wake up, I'm like pumped. I'm like super, like all my brain's been listening to for the last 8 hours is I am this, I am successful. I used to do it when I started doing it when I was in sales a long time ago. It was people like, you're crazy. What do you mean, Chris? And then I saw more of the science around the subconscious mind. And right, if you say I am, for example, it works in the opposite direction. So Shane his parents always said, Shane, you're really clumsy.
Oh.
And he always says, I am so clumsy. And guess what? Shane knocks cups over in the office every day and he kicks things and he's super clumsy because he's trained his subconscious mind to tell himself that you are very clumsy. So now I'm a big fan of I am. I constantly, in fact, I even had not an argument, but a dispute with my wife recently where she said something to me and I said, don't say that, please. She was like, I was like, I am. And you can't do this because I was like, no. That's how obsessed I am. I'm like, I catch it in the moment. I'm like, no. I am. I will. We are going to get that. And people are like, it's a bit excessive. And I was like, no, you cannot. If you say that you cannot lose weight, you will never lose weight. Ever. Because you will sabotage yourself. You won't even know it. Your subconscious will go out there and sabotage you without you even realizing as well. And there's loads of science behind it, as you know, it's just fascinating.
Chris, it's interesting. So 2 additional thoughts of that. The person who really got me focused on that was Bob Proctor, who, as you know, recently passed away. This idea of reprogramming your subconscious mind. And he was a wonderful mentor. And then the other thing that I recently discovered for people who are familiar with the Christian tradition is that Jesus, another name for Jesus is I am. And so there's a tremendous,
I did not know that.
Yeah. And so when you use those words, you're evoking this deep religious creative power as well. And one of the things that I've noticed, and it sounds like it has happened for you as well, is when you hear those words used to say something bad about yourself, it actually physically pains you to hear someone say that about themselves. And so you're like, you can't say that you're clumsy. Like you literally cannot say that because it hurts me to hear you say that. Yeah.
And I know, I did that. This was about a week ago with my wife, by the way, and I got really upset. And I was like, to her, it was irrational. Like, what I'm getting upset for, because I don't like being told that as well. And I don't like other people saying it. And it also is from a childhood where I didn't learn how to read until I was like maybe like 13, 14. And
real?
And I remember sitting next to my mum and my teacher, and they were saying, Chris has got he's got learning difficulties, he's got this, and it's just all these negative things. So I convinced myself that I can't read, I can't write, all these things. But even at that age, if you gave me a piece of paper and a pen, a pencil, or some paint, I could draw a perfect portrait of you. Like perfect. Or if you asked me to sculpt something out of clay, which I loved, I could do a perfect sculpture. But the focus and energy was always on, he doesn't like reading or writing, right? So even when I came into business, I was so scared about, I hope no one asked me anything around, maths or English. And I was I used to ask my team members to read my emails because I was so scared. So basically I was convinced, subconsciously convinced that I was terrible at these things. And it was when the moment I made the decision that I was not bad at these things whatsoever. And it the same way I learned how to rollerblade, skate, throw a basketball, and it immediately changed. And I was just completely fine.
When did you make that decision? What happened? What happened in your life that you made that decision to change that?
Because I kept seeing success I had from other things that I was learning. So I was like, because I tell everyone I'm great at sports, and I am great at sports. And I always say every sport that I do, I'm going to be the best at it, and I'm going to be really good at it. And guess what happens? I am.
You always.
I am. And I'll tell you the moment actually, and this is I've told this before, so if anyone's listened on the podcast, you probably heard this a couple of times, but I'll tell it because it's important for Whitney. So I obviously came from quite a broken home, and it was tough, and obviously I was told I was terrible, all those things, which really messed me up as a kid, because I was like, I'm a failure, I'm going to already had a hard enough upbringing, and I got bullied really, really badly in school, like to the point where I was getting robbed every day. It was bad. I was like, why am I alive that bad? It was really bad. And one summer, I said to my mum, I'm not going back to school. And there was like two more years left of school. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I just can't go back. It's just, it's just torture basically. And then I had this weird little conversation with myself where I wrote a plan of how to stop being bullied. Like how to stop being bullied. I wish I had that bit of paper. Like honestly, and I wrote down, and the one thing that I saw, and at the time, all I did was just draw and paint. That was all I did. I'd never done a sport in my life. And I realized that if I become good at one of the big sports, because all the popular people were football players, basketball players, etc., etc. So if I become really, really, really good at one of those things, and then they'll leave me alone. Because then I'll be popular, right? Because I'll be one of the best basketball. It sounds so silly, but that was my rationale, right? As a young age. So what I did, I begged my mom to buy me a basketball. And, she's a single parent of 4 kids in a council house. So we had no money. So all she could afford was just a ring. So I haven't got it's just a wall and then a ring. I had no backboard and a ball. And I spent the entire summer holidays, like 6 weeks or however long it was, just playing basketball every day, watching videos. Wow. Like I'm talking like to the point where Shane's parents, even to this day, mentioned how they hated me because all they heard for 6 weeks was the sound of the ball bouncing. Because they were the neighbors. They're like, bing, bing, doom, bing. Even my mum was like, my mum was in the kitchen. All she could hear was doom, bing, doom. Because every time I hit the wall with the basketball. And then I went back to school, and I'd never played a sport before. Went into sort of the lion's den. So literally walked into the changing rooms where all the bullies were. They're like, what are you even doing at basketball practice? Like, are you crazy, right? My bag got thrown in the shower. It was just the worst. It's like, even the teacher, Mr. Howarth, was like, what are you doing, Chris? You're asking for trouble. Anyway, so long story short, it's the first time I made the team. And it was the first time I was small, I was weak, I didn't have much strength, but I could just shoot. So every time you give it to me, I could just get it in. Could shoot the basketball. And it was that moment when I realized, I'll do whatever I want. It's the same process. Like it was horrible. I was terrible at it for weeks. My brothers and sisters would laugh at me like, what are you doing? Like go inside. Like my mum was like, stop playing. Right. And then from there I was like, oh, let me try this another sport. And then I was like, maybe do this with those things that you're told you're terrible at. English, maths, all the things I was told. And I was like, well, I've never even given it a try. I just didn't want to do it. Yeah. And then that was the moment. And by the way, like I told Chester that story, and I've got a photo, and I'll try and ask one of the team members to insert it. Because when I went to see my mum a few weeks back, I took a photo because the ring is still on the side of the house, but it's all rusty. It's like all rusty and bent, and like the net's like hanging off. But every time I walk to my mum's house and I see that net, and it's still there, I told her, don't take it down. I was like, so when I walk there and I look at it, and it's like, it brings back like so much emotion and sum up memories, because I was like, that's where it started. And people are like, and it's like everything. We would not be here talking right now if I didn't do that. So I just want so that's the story, I suppose, of where
Chris,
like kind of
thank you. And
where it began.
I know you said your listeners may have heard this before, but I had not, and it's amazing. So here are a couple of thoughts that I'm having as I'm listening to you. Number one, I think it would be amazing if you did take that down, and in this office right here where you got this finger pointing up, you should mount it.
Oh,
it should be in your office.
I'm gonna do that.
You got to do that.
All right.
It would be amazing.
And I'll take a photo. I'll promise.
Yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
And by the way, my mom hates it the way it looks. So
so your mom will be happy too, right?
She hates it so much.
So yeah, mount it and put it in your office. And then the other thing that I thought of is that one of the reasons that your superpower is being at the launch point of the curve is that was your salvation.
It really was, yeah.
When you realized that if you would grind and do it over and over again, that could save you from bullying. That was your way out.
100%. Yeah.
So that's why you're so good at it, because it is a skill that took you out of the place that you were in.
And I didn't know this until like for so long. Like someone brought that. I went to a retreat with some leaders, and it was kind of like I'm trying to think of the guy's name now. It's really bad. Anyway, it's like a 2-day retreat, and it was a mixture of like business executives, CEOs, billionaires, and we went through this process of your crucible story. So sort of talking about the most challenging moments in your life. And that's when I first discovered that story, not through me, through someone else asking me questions. They're like, trace it back. And I was like, that's the point. Yeah. Because before that, I never did anything. I just sat in my room, not talking to anyone, just drawing. Like that's, and taking cereal boxes and making stuff out of them and just doing that, because that was my escape from all of the craziness.
Yeah.
But then
how old were you when this happened?
How old are you at year 9? 13, 14.
13, 14. Okay, that's when you started to read too. So it sounds like maybe 12, 13, then you started to read because you started applying it.
Yeah, and then I was like, I immediately literally within weeks, I was like, fine.
Yeah.
But I also learned at the same time though that the way I learn wasn't through books. So I can listen to a podcast or watch a video and retain pretty much all of the information. Ask me to read a book, so hard. Like it's painful actually. For me to read a book is so painful. And for so long they were like, read this book. Then podcasts and Audible became a thing, and I was like, oh, I can listen to this and write notes whilst I'm listening. And I was like, and I could put it into, and then every hour to and from school or to and from work, the hour journey I had to school, home, that's 2 hours, on the underground, to my first job, just constantly throwing stuff in. This is why this podcast came to life, because like, wouldn't it be cool to have a HR version of that? And I was like, I wish I had this in school. I wish I didn't have to read a textbook, because it's so painful.
You know what else would be really cool, Chris, is if you, some of the artwork that you said you've done, your paintings and your sculptures, if you had those in your office as well. You have all these wonderful artifacts that I think would be amazing. Yeah.
Well, on that point, you'll enjoy this as well, right? So at the end of that 2-day retreat workshop, they said, we want to write your action plan. So I drew it.
Yeah.
And but so everyone came with their bullet points, and I said, can I use the whiteboard? And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, I can't do it. And he was like, I was like, can I draw a paint? I mean, not paint. I had like different marker pens. I was like, can I just do it? And it had basically, it was like mountains, and it was like a river running down from the mountains to a waterfall, which was like from where the destination along the way. And then along the river, I had different marker points, and the trees represented my hires. And then the house represented like some of the, and different things of the products. And then the waterfall, like basically for me, when I look at that, I'm like, that's my strategy. That's where I'm going. Here we are. And everyone else had a set of bullet points. And I was like, I can't do it. It doesn't mean nothing to me. I look at the bullet points and it means nothing. There's no inspiration. There's no passion. And I have that in the room.
Wow. I love it. Are you a musician too?
No, but I break danced. So I'm a dancer. Right. So, so yeah, music was another escape. So being able to hear a song and express that physically through dance immediately connected with me when I started dancing. And I couldn't do routines. I hated conforming to other people's vision, which was also something people were like, why? I was like, because that's not why I do it. I'm doing it to express
yourself,
myself, not someone else's vision of a dance routine. So I became a freestyler. So I went on tour with different artists and did.
I want to see you break dance.
I posted a video on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah, and people were like, "Who the hell is?" They're like, "What?" I even posted a video of me skateboarding as well because I want to do because I think a lot of people when they go into business, and I did this, you give up all of your passions.
Yeah.
It's all of a sudden like there seems to need to be the separation. So I just bought a brand new skateboard. I'm starting to pick up a lot more of the old passions that I used to do because I can do both. I don't have to, just because I'm an adult now doesn't mean I can't dance or skateboard or do these things, but I think a lot of people do. They just kind of just give up. Not say give up because everyone's busy. We've got kids. I've got a daughter. I've got a job. There's a lot going on. I get it, but we can make 1 minute, like you say.
Right. You can teach your daughter to break dance.
Or now that's exactly. So she's got, we've been to the skate park together. She's got a bike. She's been asking me to get her skates. So, it's funny because I ask people about what are your passions and they're like, oh no, I don't really have passion. I just do stuff with my kids. So I was like, no, it is a passion. Me going skating with Robin is a passion. I mean, us going out for a bike ride together is a passion.
Yeah.
You can do both. Anyway, enough about me. I want to go, but that's why I was so excited to talk to you because for so many years I was trying to explain or trying to kind of express some of those things that I've just shared with you. And I never knew there wasn't really a framework I could suggest to people. And me getting frustrated at them doesn't help because I'm like, come on.
Yeah. I would actually love it if you took the S curve and you drew it from your brain. I'd love to see what you would do with it or how you would trace your life in S curves. I would probably do it as I probably wouldn't do it in a literal sense. It would probably be abstract. Cool. I'd love to see that.
Because for me, I wouldn't want it to make you like, this is this.
It wouldn't be literal.
It wouldn't be literal. It would be, for me, it needs to be, it represents as opposed to talking through what it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even when I did, I somehow convinced my school to let me give up science to do ceramics. I don't know how I did that. Because
I don't either.
I just complained basically. I was like, I'm not doing science class because there's no value in that, even as a kid. And I was like, so I had graphics, art and ceramics. I had 3 different classes that I went to, but no one else in the school did. But I managed to give up science to do that. And it was the same thing, just being able to express yourself, right?
Yeah, like persuasive.
Yeah, it just give me, and the word was inside. How do I remember that? So I was like, 15 years old, and my final project, they gave you a word to do your final exam, and it was inside. And I remember seeing a man crying on a bench on the way to school, and he was a black guy with dreadlocks. Looked really tough, scary, but he was crying. And it was weird because you're such a tough exterior and person, you're crying. So I sculpted a giant head. And I basically did the dreadlocks. Underneath the dreadlocks was the brain, so you could see all of the brain in between the dreadlocks. Yeah. And then, but the inside was hollow, so he had a mean face. And then there was tears coming down. It was a giant, like a realistic size. And inside you could look through the eyes. There was no eyes. It was just holes. There was a graveyard inside his head. So I was like, well, something must have happened inside him to be, so you might see this tough. The fact I remember that all these years ago, and my mum has that, and there's a little graveyard. So I was like, even if someone seems okay on the outside, on the inside, they could be, and vice versa. So like those things connect to me. So no one else, I had to explain to people what it meant. Because like, what is that? Why is there a graveyard inside and one tear coming down the cheek of being able to do that, right? As well, but yeah, really great. I need to do more of that stuff. But I gave all of that stuff up. I haven't drawn or painted or done anything in a long time. I know. Jump back on that curve, Chris. How do we? So back to the world. Do people when they talk about the S curves, they're like, how do we speed it up? Is that a question you get? How do we speed up that process?
Yes, there is. And one of the things I would say is that you want to speed up your ability to move through all parts of the curve to be able to navigate the launch point, the sweet spot, and mastery. Oftentimes people want to speed up moving through the launch point, and I advise against that, because if you don't, and the reason they want to speed it up is that they don't like the open loop of not knowing how to do it yet. But if you don't take the time to explore, to collect the resources that you need, then you can you can sometimes end up on the wrong S curve because you just didn't like the uncertainty and you just wanted it to be over. And so that's how sometimes you can get the midlife or the quarter life crisis, because you didn't take the time to decide, do I want to actually be here? Do I want to actually do this thing? And so, yes, you want to be able to go fast, but you don't want to neglect each part of the curve, because each part of the curve is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I asked that because everyone wants it now. Everything now, quick, shortcut. Mm-hmm. There's no easy way. If you
got to do the work.
If you skip that first part, right, and you don't build that solid foundation, it kind of crumbles along the way, which is why, when we start something like, again, going back to the dance, you start with the foundations.
Right.
Because if you don't build those solid foundations first, or the core stability, etc., the strength and conditioning, you can't do a backflip because you will just crumble along the way. But I see so many people
or break a limb, right?
Literally, quite literally, be able to do that. You mentioned earlier, obviously, how organizations can use this as a tool to retain talent. Obviously, huge talking point right now. In a practical sense, though, for the people that are still with the organization, how could they do that? Is it then training up their leaders to use this? Is it them directly? What does that look like in a practical sense?
It's a both and. So let me give you a quick example. So one of the companies that we work with is a company called Chatbooks, and they turn Instagram photos into photo books. And great company, good culture, but when we administered our S-Curve Insight tool, a number of the senior executives were presenting in mastery, which puts you at risk of either leaving or just sort of getting complacent. And so this now gave them a language to talk about the experience that they were having. In one case, you had a person who was in mastery and she was the chief marketing officer, and it turns out there wasn't anything else for her to do. So she did jump to a curve in another organization, but it was an amicable conversation because it wasn't about the organization. It wasn't, I don't like working for you or here. It's just that I need a new curve. Another conversation that was able to take place is that the president was showing up in mastery, even though he'd been in the role for about a year. Well, turns out when they looked at the roles and responsibilities of the CEO and the president, the CEO was trying to jump to a new curve, but he hadn't quite. So he was still doing a lot of the president's jobs, which made the president feel like, I don't have any headroom. Like, you're telling me this is a ceiling, but it feels like it's here. So it allowed them to restructure the roles and responsibilities. And he was able to stay as opposed to leave because he was frustrated. And then the third way that you can use it is, and the CTO, he was doing a lot of new things. And so it was a little bit uncomfortable. We've been talking a lot about that. It gave him permission to say, I'm going to do this new stuff. I'm still a CTO, but I'm taking on some new projects. I'm going to be at the launch point. So it's going to be awkward and it's going to be uncomfortable. Doesn't mean I'm not competent. It just means I'm doing new things. And so you now had this tool, that people could use to talk about, in some instances, leave, but also here's how we can retain you, because we're having the conversation about what growth looks like. Where are you? And what can I do as your manager? And what do you need to do as the person who works for me in order to grow?
Absolutely love that. So it creates really like that common language for people to have conversations around, which is a huge part of it, right? We don't know. So what does that look like? Is it like an assessment that they take? How long does that typically take?
It's a 10-minute assessment. And so then what it will do is it'll allow you to see where you are on the curve. Then as a manager, you can look at it and see, where is everybody on my team, and use that as talent development tool and a retention tool. But you can also use it to look at your team overall of, are we optimized for growth? Because if I've got all of my people in mastery, they're probably not asking questions like, why do we do it like this? And so you can look at, oh, I want most of my people to be in the sweet spot, some of them at the launch point, some in mastery, so that I can optimize my organization, my team for innovation. So you can use it on an individual basis, but as a tool for growing your team and innovating across the organization as well.
Absolutely love that. I'm thinking back as a manager and a director, losing some of my top talent and getting so frustrated, but now looking back, realizing they were at the top of that curve.
They were.
And,
right.
and they didn't leave because it was like they didn't like me or the business, but they were just like bored. They want something new.
That's right. They needed dopamine, right? And that's the other thing that's really important is what this does is it tells you, where do you, Chris, perceive you are in your growth? Because it doesn't matter that I looked at you and say, you're in this sweet spot, you're killing it. What matters is, what's your experience? If you feel like you are at the mastery, that is going to predict your behavior, not where I think you are. And so this is a tool that helps you assess that.
It's similar when I speak to CHROs that have been in a company for like 20 years plus. I already know that they've been in like 15 different roles during that time.
Right.
Because they wouldn't have been there otherwise. And immediately, before I even asked the question, they're like, yeah, I was in 2 years, I was out in Dubai, and then I was over in India, then I was in North America, and I had this role over here in operations, and I came back to HR and I went here. And I was
That's
like,
right.
and immediately I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I immediately get it.
Yeah.
And it's organizations that like that recognize that, who can go, oh, I can see that. There's a new role here, there's a new opportunity here that retain that talent in the business.
Right.
Yeah,
that's right.
What's the traditional method that people use, that you've used before this, or was there not one? How are companies currently doing this, or they're not doing a great job at all?
Oh, I think people have had ways of doing it, but I think it's been very intuitive. What this does is it allows you to have, like you said, you've got this very simple model. You have a language that allows you to have that conversation very easily and very readily and say, again, I think I'm at the top of the curve. I'm not getting the dopamine. That means I've got latent innovative potential. Let's see what we can do new, because I want to stay here. And it just makes it easy to have that conversation.
Yeah. One of the questions that a lot of my friends ask and colleagues is, how do you know when change is a good thing, or when to make a change, or how to even think about starting something new? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's a lot of different questions you can ask yourself. And we talk about this in the mastery phase of the curve. So there's the anchor phase where you say, okay, I did it. I accomplished what I set out to do. One of the ways that you know that it's time to change, to, get to the top of the curve and keep climbing, is if you feel like, okay, I've been in the same role for 3 or 4 years. So that can be one indicator of like just time and role. Take a look at it. Has anything changed? The second thing is you can ask yourself, do I find myself saying, I'm kind of bored? Do I find myself saying things like, that's not how we do it here? Or we've already tried that. Or you find yourself feeling resentful of other people who are coming up behind you and they're getting opportunities. Those are all indications to you that it is time for you to do something new, that you are starting to stagnate, you're starting to get bored. And so if you don't do something new, if you don't find a way to reconfigure your role in order to grow, your plateau can become a precipice. So you can jump or you'll get pushed. And it's always preferable if you jump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it kind of goes back to what we said earlier about your other example of that person that felt like the ceiling was already hit.
Yep. That's right.
And I felt like that in my previous company. That I was there for 10 years and I was like, I don't know where else up is. There's nowhere else to go. And I was going wide as I could. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I wasn't going up, but I was like, okay, let me expand my knowledge in these areas and getting more deep. Then I got to a point where I was like, I've gone deep enough. There's nothing else. Right. There's no, I can't go deeper anymore into the subject matter. Like really, even in sales, I started looking into like micro expressions about when I sell to someone, like whether they blink twice, whether it means they're lying or not. And like, I don't know how much more I can go in this space. And also on a more serious note, it took a big impact on my mental health. Mm-hmm. Where I started having anxiety and even heart palpitations, and of the idea of just going back to that place and doing the same thing again. Like it got that bad where I was just like, and even my team noticed it. Chris is turning up late. Right. Chris is, off sick, 2 times a month, because there was I was telling myself,
right, exactly. That's exactly right. Well, our body starts to tell us things that in fact, you just reminded me, I think if you're getting sick a lot, your body is telling you need to make a change. And to your point, if you start showing up late, you start self-sabotaging. Yes. I actually have this hypothesis that when people get laid off or fired, oftentimes, having been fired myself, oftentimes you now know you are at the top of the curve and it's no longer the right curve, and you know you need to jump and you won't do it. So the universe gives you a nudge.
It's interesting you say that, right? Because I got pushed out of the last role because of a dispute with the CEO and his best friend, which is interesting, a whole nother story. But it felt like a really lonely walk home. And then that turned into this company. So I was like, and then we look back and we're like, it was horrible. It didn't feel great. You know, I just bought a house, had to spend all my savings, I just got married. So also definitely spent all my savings within literally a few months, had no money, had a mortgage, and we're like, all right, we're going to do this. This is the time chain. We're going to start this company. We've got 3 months of savings to make it work. And we did. But if it wasn't for those moments, you're right. It kind of felt like the universe was a sign there. And in similar with Shane's job, he was not getting on with his manager, and it was like, well, I'm here. I want more. I want more responsibility. I want to grow. There was no growth, and then we both were like, let's just do it ourselves. As well. Honestly, I want to keep talking, but I'm conscious of time as well. But there's so many more things, and I'm really excited to get this in the hands of everyone. Genuinely, if you're listening right now, you've heard my story, and hopefully that helps relate. Because I also wanted to share that. Is I see so much of myself in sort of things that you're sharing, and I've never been able to put it into words or a framework. And I know that so many people are going to pick up the book, especially after the last 2 years, and really drive it and put it into action. It's going to change so many people's lives. And for everyone listening, reach out to Whitney. Bring, all of you HR leaders are out there. You need to bring Whitney into Brittany. I just changed her name now.
Next she'll be calling me Whitney Houston, and I've heard that one before too.
Have you really?
Oh, yes, so many times
as well. But I'm super excited for you, and congratulations again on the book and the launch. Where can people follow you? Obviously, massive. If you're not already following Whitney on LinkedIn, firstly do that. Also, you've got the podcast as well, right?
Yeah. It's the Disrupt Yourself podcast. So
tune into that one. I'm a big fan of that. And also, where's the best website for people to grab a copy of the book? Yeah.
So you can go to smartgrowthbook.com is an easy place to go. Or Amazon or your local bookseller, right? It's everywhere.
Anywhere and everywhere you can buy books.
Yes.
Exactly. And just out of curiosity, that assessment, is that just part of the work you do one-on-one with companies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about it, you can just email me at wj@whitneyjohnson.com.
All right. Amazing. Well, look, thanks again. Let's not leave 3 years again before.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Chris. It was fun. Take care.
Bye.